Right, let's get started. Buongiorno, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for walking all the way to the far end of the conference center to come here and spend about 1 hour talking about identity. My name is Vittorio Bertocci, and as I'm used to say, I have my classic Redmond accent. I'm based on our headquarters. And my job since July is a program manager on the identity engineering team. Until recently, my job was to blabber about identity to a developer audience. Now I get to build the product. So before I could blame the engineering team, now I can't anymore. Well, I can, but that's kind of inappropriate. How many of you guys are developers? Yeah. Yes. Thank you. How many of you guys are driver developers? OK, I apologize, sir. This talk is a way higher level than the one you'd expect. And in fact, despite the fact that it's an 800, in my career, I've never done something so deep. Actually, no, of course, in this conference, the numbers do not really reflect the depth. Otherwise, we'd have to talk about I guess, quantum physics for an 800. It's more of like 250 to 300. And as the title entails, this is about identity and the Windows Azure platform. But I'll tell you a secret, which the gentleman is recording, so it won't be a secret anymore pretty soon. What we are going to discuss does not apply exclusively to Windows Azure. That's the place where all these strategies will shine the best, but you can actually apply it pretty much all over the place. How many of you attended or saw somehow my talk at PDC last year? A good percentage. Great. So for you guys, I have to warn you, there is some overlap. I don't choose that. It is that the strategies that we explained since 5 years ago are still good. They were very good to begin with. We promised that if you would commit to claims-based identity, you'd be fine for the foreseeable future, and that's true. How many of you guys saw the keynote in day 2? OK. I was expecting everybody, but that's great. You may have seen John Shuchak showing a little demo, of which I'm inordinately proud of, in which you have seen getting some single sign-on right off the short. That thing is using the access control service and the claims-based identity. And that technology wasn't even invented at the time in which we came out with a claims-based identity. So that's proof that it's good that we keep repeating this because it keeps working. However, I'll try to keep the overlap to a minimum. Also, rules of the house, you may have heard from other speakers as well. I don't work on the Windows 8 team. So I'm not qualified to answer questions about Windows 8. So I'll stick religiously to the talking points that I've been given. And if you ask me questions about that, I will have to just shut up. So please don't be upset at me. Also, for this reason, I will not take a QA during the session. I'll do it at the end. And without further ado, my takeaways are exactly the same as my agenda. So I collapsed everything in one slide. My first point, which should be a pretty easy sell, is that your cloud applications need identity. In other words, that's not a problem that you can ignore. And since that's pretty obvious to me, I'm going to spend one slide just for due diligence. Then I'm going to spend significantly more to talk about why identity can be complicated. I didn't believe that at first. But then I spent 5 years accumulating frequent flyer miles, flying around the planet, and teaching classes about identity. And well, it turns out that, yes, people think it's complicated. So we'll spend some time separating myth from fact, because there is a lot to be demystified in there. And then we'll actually invest some time to go past the apparent chaos that you see in there and actually see the underlying infrastructure. You'll see that it is actually not that hard, but it requires a bit of investment. And in so doing, we will see the places where identity makes things apparently complicated to you, and how the access control service can help, can actually abstract away some of that complexity. Now, I know that many of you are here because of the Windows 8 demo. I know that others said that here we would dissect how Windows 8 works in terms of taking advantage of ACS and similar, and yes, I will be doing that. One of the two applications I will show is exactly that. But before getting there, I needed to create some context. Otherwise, it's just like giving you a fish, and instead, I'd like to teach you to fish. So you'll see all these in the correct context. Fair? Do we have a deal? If we don't, we have fantastic other sessions going on right now in this very moment. So please don't delay. 1, 2, 3, 4 doors. If instead we have a deal, then let's dive right in. So your applications in the cloud need identity. Why? Well, they are worth protecting. The cloud, it's true, if you believe our marketing, and you should, you absolutely should always. I don't know why you are laughing. And when you use the cloud, you actually do things like you avoid paying the CapEx, you can do models like pay-per-use. So you can actually save significantly rather than actually having your infrastructure and similar. However, that's not free yet. So usually when you put stuff in the cloud, that's because you are expecting some kind of return, be it in form of business, be it in form of actual money, like users that pay for you. So unless your model is a pure impression advertisement, in which the more users, the better, in all the other cases, you want to understand if the incoming request is coming from a user that you are interested in. Now, you may tell me, actually, how many of you guys come from an enterprise background? Oh, very good. I will ask you to keep your hands up because my field of view is about 120, so I need time to sweep the room. Thank you. Good. So you are used to have some kind of infrastructure that you rely upon. So if your users are your employees, then you are used to get kind of this identity, not exactly for free, but as a return of investment of your infrastructure. So let's say that you actually have your employees in here, and you have your nice, fancy infrastructure. So here, let me put your employee. Aggressive deadlines. And here, as you can see from the picture, like this thing is yours. You are paying for it, but it lives outside of your infrastructure. So there's not much that you can do. Actually, no, there is a lot that you can do for reusing your infrastructure, but it won't happen for free. You'll need to take explicit steps for making that happen. And that is actually hard. I'm sorry, I had to embarrass my colleague that came in late. She's Isabel Miragaya. Am I doing a good job? OK. And so your employees, in this case, even if normally you are used to get everything for free, in this case, you may have to do some steps. So once again, you need to think about identity. But then, how many of you guys actually work on applications that you sell, like a software as a service, for example? Hey, look at that. That's great. Like, if I would have asked this question 3 years ago, I bet that like 1/4 of you guys would have shown your hand. Well, if you are selling to others, the problem is actually even worse, because others may have a completely different infrastructure, and yet you need to cope with them somehow. So let me put the customer here with different equipment. I'm showing the difference. And in this case, it's even worse. Let's say that you absolutely need to deal with the identity of the incoming part, because substantially you need to distinguish between paying customers and freebies. So I assume that this convinced you that you need identity when you deal with the cloud. I am I couldn't have asked for a better reaction. Thank you. Now, things get more funky. Let's talk for a moment about why identity is complicated. Now, here I'm going to share my personal opinion. So please, if you tweet or blog, don't write Microsoft is saying X. Say the Italian hippie is saying X. This is truly my opinion. Now, how many of you guys are familiar or actually heard the term WS security or WS trust? Fantastic. Many of you. Now, computer scientists are a bit like Leonardo. As you see, those are some of the engines that I don't know if I managed to render them in a way that you recognize them. But we like hard problems, and we like to give very thoughtful solutions. So WS security, WS trust, those are fantastic protocols, really very powerful. They give you all sorts of guarantees from the cryptographic perspective. You have non-repudiation, you have confidentiality, you have integrity, all the things that you need in enterprise environment. As a result, those guys are complicated. They are complex. And the deal was that, yes, those are complex, but on the specs, there's the signature of the who's who, basically, of the early 2000s of the industry. Everybody agreed on those things. And the deal was that everybody would do a stack in their platform which would hide away the complexity of this stack and allow the developer to use that. Well, it really didn't happen. We did our part. WCF is like marvelous engine. It really works well, and it covers the breadth of all these protocols. However, before moving to the States back in 2004, I remember working for a financial customer, and I was working with a competitor in another platform. And we needed to create this cross-platform system. And of course, web services were all the rage, so we were doing this based on web services. On our side, with Visual Studio, I put everything together in like a couple of days. That's great. Bravo, Vittorio. But on the other side, and of course I can't tell you the name of a competitor, that didn't happen. That didn't happen because even if the company had the signature on those specs, their product wasn't up to speed yet. And so here, it went that way, but it could have gone exactly in the opposite way, in which they would be farther along than us. But the neat result was we had an open protocol. It was shared across the industry. Both companies were signed up for it, and yet, in the end, we used a completely proprietary solution because simply we couldn't make this thing work. Now, this is actually something that happened with WS Security and WS Star. They are used a lot in enterprise environments and similar, but as scenarios that are like less heavyweight and more agile, like using web APIs and similar came along, well, they started showing some of those shortcomings, which leads me to the next step. Sometimes the bad rep that you get from identity is because you use the wrong tool for the job. So if you are a company, and if you are sending to a message to a bank saying, those are my 10,000 employees, please emit their salary, well, you want that message to be secure, non-repudiable, integer, like everything. You want the entire thing. If instead you are setting up a quick mashup of different web APIs, well, usually you don't see the need for having a full-fledged PKI, elliptic curves, cryptography, and all these kind of things. You don't care. You just want this thing to work as soon as possible. And so very often, people say, OK, I need some security. They go and they search on their favorite search engine. And the results that they get are the one from the literature of security, which, of course, talks about the big cases, so big, powerful protocols and similar. And some people reject that, say, no, that's useless. That's too complex. No. It's too complex for that scenario. So some of these is bad reputation. However, you can shelve as much complexity as you want. But when you are talking about people, there is always an intrinsic level of complexity. You are dealing with users. Users will forget things, will not be able to do things, will be occasionally malicious, because if there is something worth protecting, it is also worth stealing. So there is some level of complexity. Luckily, we are going in the right direction. How many of you guys are familiar with the OAuth protocol? Yeah, many. The OAuth protocol is the right direction. It is dramatically simplifying and similar. And yet, it's still not a walk in the park. If you follow Programmable Web, which is a great website for people that use web API integration, just 1 month ago, they did one survey about what was the biggest pain in the neck about using all these integrating APIs. Now, guess what was the highest rated pain in all these? No, the first one was a lack of documentation. But auth was the second. Auth was the second among all the potential annoyances that you get. So there is some level of complexity there that is unavoidable. But it's like we can really, like once you get there, it's not that hard. It's still, you still need to put some investment in there. And of course, with all of these new form factors, like before, the browser was enough for everything, and now instead, apps on our platform, apps on other platforms, and similar, things get even more interesting. But as I said before, it's just a matter of finding a method in this madness. There is an underlying infrastructure, and we are going to discover it together. And unfortunately, I spent all my time doing all these little pictures. So my other slides are empty. But never fear, if the ones that already saw know what's going to happen, I'm just going to draw those on the fly. That's not because I'm lazy. I assure you that it is much harder to do this rather than having the ready slides. But I just think that it's easier for you guys to follow if you see things coming up from scratch. So we said, let's start from the user. So let me grab the user and put it at the center of our world. Now, there are 3 questions that are important for understanding how your identity system needs to look like. The first one is, from where are your users coming from? Let's put some potential places. You could want users from Yahoo, users from Google, users from LiveID, users from Facebook, users from a directory. Why is this important? Because the identity provider is the least movable object in your entire ecosystem. If you're writing a game for Facebook, you don't have much choice. You've got to use the Facebook users. There is no other way around it. And of course, that's one extreme, but you can see where I'm going with that. And the interesting thing is that in recent years, all of those providers added ways of leveraging programmatically their capability of authenticating. However, everybody pretty much does what they want. So Yahoo and Google use OpenID. LiveID and Facebook use a layering on top of auth, which is different in both cases, uses different kind of tokens. And in directories, instead, you have the usual powerful protocols for the enterprise, but you usually don't have those new agile protocols. Well, you can ask until you are blue in the face. If Facebook decides that Facebook Connect is the way to go, you've got to cope with that. And this entails various requirements on your infrastructure. The other question that you want to ask yourself, especially in modern times, is how? How those guys are consuming your things. So let's start from the good old browser. Let's say that here you have your classic browser. That's great. Fine. We know exactly how it works. Or perhaps they want to use a device. That could be Windows, that could be any other type. Or it could be a phone. And there is actually a third way of connecting. Anybody wants to try a guess? Almost, but B2B is a good approximation. Let's say another website. So let's say that you go on the website of your heart monitor, and your heart monitor says, do you want to connect to Twitter so that once your heartbeat goes beyond 200, we tweet that you are about to die? You laugh, but it's a business scenario. And in that case, what's happening is that that website is asking access to Twitter on your behalf. So that website is for you a server as a user, but for Twitter, it is a client. And at that point, that's another way in which your identity gets to flow through this. And now the interesting thing is that for what we have drawn so far, we can subdivide the word into two halves. The part that is on the left of this line and the part that is on the right. The part that is on the left is typically what we call the passive word. Why passive? Passive because the preferred way of dealing with things is using a browser. A browser is a dumb machine for rendering UI content. That's all it does. So we call that passive. And in fact, the typical resource that you want, and this answers the third question that you have, which is, what are you going to serve to your user, are web pages. Whereas when you do the active stuff, you actually need web services. Web services that can be SOAP or can be REST. Here we'll talk mostly about REST. So those are all the actors of our flow. Now let's actually move one further step and let's see how this stuff works together. So this needs to be copied. I'll just take the tablet as representative of all the active devices, because the other ones work pretty much in the same way. But I forgot, oh, Google, no, I can't forget Google, come on. That would be highly inappropriate. So here we have our user, and let's see exactly how this thing plays out. Now, how many of you saw the original Karate Kid movie? Some white also in your beard, I can see. So there was the guy saying wax in, wax out. And here I think this get token, use token, handle session in the same way. The secret of all identity transactions is obtain a token, authenticate somehow, use this token for access a resource, and if you're going to go after this resource often, somehow get a session done. Those are the three things that you need to do. In every application, passive, active, doesn't matter. And the interesting thing is that it's all the variations in all these things, the protocols, the different way in which you perform those actions, which actually create the complexity. So let's see what I'm talking about. Let's say that I want to access one application using Google. Well, I will use OpenID for getting a token. I will use OpenID sending it. And the session is going to be done through a cookie. So here, let me put an Oreo. More or less green, better not to eat it. But Yahoo is pretty much the same, but of course, I use a different token format. Come on. And if you want to do the same with Live, you will instead use this form of OAuth that I described. So same flow. I want to redraw the cookie, but it's the same trick. Facebook is more or less the same. And with directories, typically you use WS Federation or similar. So it starts to be a bit colorful. Now, if you wanted to do the same from a tablet, for example, here you can use WS Trust and make this call using WS Trust. Or you can also use a slightly different form of OAuth with those guys. Never mind that there is some, how to say, interesting difficulties because those guys ask you for a browser for authenticating. So, but we'll visit that part in depth. So that looks not especially nice, especially because when you look at that, think that every color of a line means downloading a different SDK and integrating it and making it coexist in the same application. Anybody ever tried that? Half a person, because not very. How was the experience? Miserable. Thank you. Thank you. I assure you I didn't pay the gentleman there, but it was just perfect. Thank you. So, what can we do about it? Here, I always say the same thing, but I think that Knut started saying that like 50 years ago, so I'm in very good company. In computer science, when you have a problem, what do you do? Exactly, abstraction. You add one level of indirection. And that's exactly what I am going to do. What if I put something in front of those two guys And this something is some kind of middleware which decouples the application from the details of all these protocols. Hence, with gusto, I delete all this stuff, I leave one single line, and I'm done. From my application point of view, all that stuff is gone. I don't need to download any further SDKs. I'm just leveraging this middleware. And I won't pay much attention to it in this session, but this middleware in our platform is the Windows Identity Foundation. Super powerful. How many of you guys ever used it? Yes. Thank you. Now, this thing was fun. I really liked it. So I think that I'll try to apply the same technique where I see more complexity. Let's see. Hop. OK. Hey, look at that. This is great. At this point, I also fixed this. Now, there, I didn't use Windows Identity Foundation. What did I use? There, I'm using what we call the access control service, which is not really a layer in front of these things, like in a moment I'll move it around, but it is an intermediary. It is something which lives between the application that you're using and all the identity providers and takes care of all the details. And I'll show that in a moment. So that's pretty much it. At the high level, there is no more than this. So as you can see, you don't get to zero complexity. You still have to pay some attention. In the end, you may be moving personal identifiable information, you may be moving money, and similar. But still, this is dramatically simpler than the rainbow that we have seen before. Would you agree? Yeah. Less than before, but I'll take what I can get. Now, finally, we get to the practical point of view. The rest of the session is going to be dedicated to looking at two notable cases. The first one is the case in which I'm writing a website, of course, running in Windows Azure, but remember what I said at the beginning of the talk. And the other one is going to be a rich application. It just happens to be a Windows 8 Metro-style application. I have to remember exactly how we call it, otherwise, like cut my hair. Or worse, or worse. And I know that you guys wanted to go straight to the Windows 8 stuff, but please bear with me through the website. I'll try to go as fast as possible, because it's so much easier to explain some of these concepts in the website, and then you'll reap the benefits once we get on the other side. So let me paste the same scenario as before. Let's get rid of some ink. Then no tablet for now, no web service for now. And the access control service is more an intermediate step. So here the flow is pretty straightforward. And again, if it's not clear at the end of this, search online, you'll find piles and piles of material with the same difficult to understand accent, for which I apologize, which explain the same thing over and over again. So here you have your user. Your user tries to get to the application. Now there is this middleware layer which stops the call and recognizes that the user is not authenticated. And since we are using the access control service as an intermediary, it redirects the call here. Now let's say that the access control service is used for actually decoupling from all those identity providers. We want to be able to use them all. Now the access control service will present the user with what we call the home realm discovery page. It's a page which contains a list of all the options. Don't get fooled by the, how to say, poor appearance of that. This is just a developer tool. You can make it as pretty as you want. So let me actually put it in the browser. See, doing that out of the box is really difficult. Instead, if I do it on the fly, it works. So it's not that I'm lazy. Please don't write in the comments. The guy is lazy. Also looks like lazy. Now, let's say that the user picks. Do you have a preference? Which identity provider do you want me to pick? I heard, oh, OK, let's go Google. Perfect. Here, we will go there with the protocol that Google expects, in this case, OpenID. So we are doing in the access control service what we call the protocol transition pattern. in which we approach the application with one protocol. You don't need to know, but I'll tell you anyway, it's WS Federation, works out of the box. And instead, when we go to the identity provider, we use whatever language the identity provider talks. Here, we'll get back some kind of a token. We'll send this token to the access control service, and the access control service will manufacture. Let's actually do something better looking. Another token in another format, for example, will send it back to me, and then I'll send it back here. Very easy. Now, let me just show you the end result of this without showing you the steps. And this one, I'm going super fast simply because I'm certain that you guys, many of you saw it many, many times. So here I have one Windows Azure solution. It's already configured to trust my access control service. And if the access control service is already configured? Configured or configured? I'm sorry, I'm not a native English speaker, so from time to time I have these doubts. And so it's already configured to use all these identity providers, and so I can already take advantage of all these. So we said that we want to use Google. I click on Google. I get there. I log in using John Doe. OK. And then basically what happens is that we do all the back and forth that I just described. And here what I get is a token, which contains the proof that I successfully authenticated with Google. And here you can actually have interesting details about your user. Those are the famous claims that give the name to the approach. Nothing strange so far. Now let's dig a bit deeper on how all these happened. Like here I put a box and I said ACS, but what's in there? How did I do all that? And again, in the interest of time, I'm trying to do it as fast as possible. So let me just clean up all these lines. And let me blow out the access control service so that we can actually put stuff in it. Well, the access control service is a service, something which lives in the cloud, and substantially it's a set of settings that you can use for telling to it your policy of access. So which applications you want to protect, from which identity providers you want to get, and similar. And the first element that you usually deal with is the portal. There is a portal which substantially exposes a number of settings that you can use for telling to the access control service what you want to do. Where do you find this portal? You find it under the usual Windows Azure portal. How many of you guys ever used Windows Azure? Excellent. So sorry, but I have only one core when it comes to type, so I can't speak at the same time. Also a small core. So here you get all the list of services. Let me pick the App Fabric. Let me pick the access control. And what I get here is the list of all my what we call namespaces. Namespaces are just a way of aggregating together a collection of settings which make sense together. So in this case, I'm going to grab this guy and pull out the management portal, which is the same that we have seen in the screenshot. Here I have a number of things that I can do. Those are basically all the functionality that I have available. And the first one that I want to look at is the application integration. The way in which you interact with the access control service is by sending stuff to its endpoints. And depending on what you want to do, you'll send different stuff. So in this case, I want the portal. So I'm asking for it, and I'm getting back HTML. Then if I wanted to support certain protocols, then what I have is a collection of endpoints for each protocol that I want to support. So I have WS Federation, WS Trust, Auth, and similar. I'm not putting them all here because we don't have a lot of time. And then another set of endpoints that I have is more more generic. So for example, there is the endpoint I'm using for getting the portal. But there is also the endpoint with a description of the endpoints that I want to use, so that creating the integration between my app and ACS is very easy. And so here, you may have seen these many, many times. If I want to configure one app to connect to the access control service, all I need to do is grab the metadata, come here, do this wizard, which gets installed by the Windows Identity Foundation SDK, and just provide the name of this. So I've done this before, that's why it worked. But anyway, this is super easy, very, very straightforward. Then what else do we have? We have other controls, like, for example, which identity providers I want to support. So here, there is the existing list of identity providers. And there is quite a collection. There is a Facebook, there is Google, there is one OpenID. Anybody from the Netherlands? Nobody from the Netherlands. Ah, hey! Oh, no, he's Italian. He is making fun of us. Grazie, caro, grazie. I'll remember that. But anyway, this IVES OpenID is one very popular OpenID provider in Netherlands. So I added it just for showing off that we have OpenID. So let's say that I want to add Yahoo to my collection. So here is as simple as adding Yahoo and hitting next. Save. That's it. That's all I had to do. I didn't have to go and download the SDK. And now, if I move in here, basically what happened is that I have one set of identity providers, and it's just part of my namespace. Then the last thing that I needed to do here is to say to the access control service which information from that identity provider I want to make available to the application. By default, it's 0. I don't want to leak anything. So if I wanted to make information available, I needed to add the rules which tell to the access control service what to do with the information. So I can pass it through without modifying it, but I can also somehow use it for applying my own logic. So I can say, for example, that if I get a token from live from Adam Carter, then I want to assign it to Adam the role sales. And that's a simple rule, simple inference rule, like we studied at school here. So if I go back here, I can go to my rule groups, pick my set of rules, and I'm not going to do anything sophisticated. I'm just generating the rules for Yahoo. As you can see here, it's matched so that I will get my pass-through rules for Yahoo. And that's pretty much it. This is all there is to know about what access control is about. In fact, here, if I do another run, I haven't changed the code. Now, what do you expect we will see? Exactly. We'll have Yahoo among the various identity providers. And we are getting there. And in fact, Yahoo. So how do you know it I didn't cheat? Well, I'll just have to show that I can actually use it, I guess. So here I have my Yahoo, which is even using the Italian version because I subscribed before moving to the States many years ago. So I sign in, and voila, it just worked. As you can see, I get, oh, now you have my email on Yahoo. You can spam me if you want. So as you can see, that wasn't hard at all. It was really, really straightforward, and I didn't have to download any tools. So I think that's pretty cool. But now, of course, I know that you are here for these, right? Come on, some enthusiasm. Thanks. Not the reaction I was expecting, but hey, I'll take it. So let me go back to our generic schema, this one, and let's instead do some steps for talking about the rich client applications and how they are different. So what I'm going to say now is not specific to Windows 8. It is actually about any rich client application that you can think of, regardless of a platform. So let's get rid of a browser, the web page. Let's move this one here. Let's move this guy slightly higher. I need room. Tablet here. Very happy because you got the tablet. Because you got the tablet, of course. Hey, you blue collars, go back to work. No, I'm joking, of course. Of course, I'm joking. So, what happens here? Here, remember, walks on, walks off. Get token, use token, create session. Now, when you use a rich client application and you try to get on one resource, here there is no redirect-based flow. There is no challenge response. I'm making a call. Literally, it's like fdx, and maybe I'm even assigning it to something. So here there is no redirect. If I hit that thing and I'm not authenticated, all I get back is a 401. It's not, hey, this is a 401, but if you want to save yourself, go to that identity provider and authenticate. Here, there is no saving. In other words, when you're calling a web service, the web service, regardless if it's SOAP or REST, and here I'm talking about REST, expects you to show the correct credentials. OK, so let's go grab those credentials. First consideration, before, the list of identity providers was handled by a web page. Like my application didn't have to change when I added Yahoo. Now, instead, the logic for going to one or the other typically is in here. Like you're writing a reach up, you're writing that code. So when you want to add Yahoo, well, you may actually have to go and write code for doing that. But it gets even more fun. Most of those identity providers will allow users to authenticate exclusively through the use of the browser. That's to say that if you want to write a third-party application, the only way of getting a token from them is prompting the user through a browser. Here, you're writing one rich application. So what is the browser? I heard a few shy replies. Well, the answer is there is no browser. There is no spoon. Actually, there is a way of getting to the browser, but we'll talk about that in a moment. What's enough for you to understand at this point is there is a problem to be solved. There is a disconnect between the way in which you're writing a rich app and the way in which those guys are asking you to use their capabilities. Good. Then, what is the third thing that we need to worry about? Sessions. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. The user doesn't care, Honey Badger doesn't care, that when you are using a service, you are not using cookies. All they know is that somehow, I don't want to know yet, you asked them to put their credentials in, and now for a reasonable amount of time, we are talking about users, so reasonable can vary a lot in meaning. But anyway, definitely not within 5 minutes. They don't expect it to be prompted again. So once you get this token, you better hold dear on that so that you ask the user as little as possible, but not less, to authenticate. So what do? The cookies are basically managed by the system. That's to say that any decent operating system and any decent browser will do that for you. Here, every platform will be slightly different. The token is something which is very, very powerful. So you don't want to save it in a share, because the moment in which somebody grabs that cookie, it becomes the user. So you need to be very, very careful on how you do that. Now that we said all these, let's dream for a moment. Let's think that we solved all these problems. And let's see how one app that actually is using that behaves. So let's see the end result. I won't torture you with all the little steps. Let's just see the end result, and then we'll come back and we dissect how this application worked. This application is exactly the same code that you have seen for Margie Travel, but it's like the rugged developer real man version instead of the fluffy, colorful stuff. So here we have our application, which of course I try to use a coherent theme. And it asked me to sign in. Fine. Let me hit on sign in. And here I get my list of identity providers. Good. Which one do we want to use? Well, this time I will overrule you, and I'll pick Facebook. I promise the other one works. I can show you. Actually, you can see it by yourself. You can download the Windows Azure Toolkit for Windows 8, and there is a version of this app. So let me sign in. So now you know my Facebook. Please make a good use of it. Don't. And now the bits, of course, I have to go all the way to one side and then to the other, and then eventually they'll come back here. Well, basically, what's happening here is that I obtained my token, and now what's happening here, I have my token here, which is, of course, a REST-friendly token. Here I have one URI or one service protected through OAuth 2, and here I can prove it to you. I can change the token, call the service, and I get a signature is invalid. Oh no, what did I change? I knew you would think that, but I chose that wisely. So I click Invoke now, and a few horrible moments in which I lose a life expectancy of 10 years. It worked, it worked. People of not a lot of faith, myself included. As you can see, congratulations, we correctly called this. Good. So we do have one application that does all the things that we need to do. Actually, there is yet another thing that we want to see. So let me close this application, and let me run it again. And I'm already in. I don't need to, again, go through the list, type all my passwords and similar. And of course, let's hit logout. Great. So how did we do that? Let's take a look. So I will need all this stuff. Come to Papa. Thank you so much. There's my solipsistic perspective. Everything was fine. I'm sorry for being so non-considerate. So we already know how ACS looks like, so I already have one ready for your viewing pleasure, so I don't have to redraw it. And then here we need to see actually what happens inside the application. So I will need to add something here to represent my app. So all that I put on the green area is what's happening inside my application. So here, what happens? We start the application. In Windows 8, there is this new feature called the password vault. This is a part of the areas of the operating system that can actually roam across devices, provided that those devices are what we call trusted. In other words, you register those devices somewhere saying, yes, they are trusted, and you are signing in the machine instead of using a local user or a domain user with a live ID account. So that's something that today is literally possible. You can enter your machine from the very start using a live ID. If you use that in both places, then this stuff will roam. So we wrote our application with the assumption that there will be a token in there. So as soon as we start, we take a look at this vault, and we search for a specific token. And if we find it, we go straight to the place that you have seen. If we don't, then we go ahead with all the sign-in experience. So this time, let me hit the debugger so that we'll go through the various breakpoints. OK. Can you see it, or do you want it bigger? It's OK. Perfect. Always harder to have like 500 different answers. So here, as you can see, first thing, I retrieve my password vault, and then I query it for the name of the application that I'm calling. And here, I'm using a username, but in reality, I'm using a token. So here, I'm using just a placeholder, because there is no username. And if it doesn't find it, it actually raises an exception. But I'm ready for it, because I have this catch. And what I do is I actually manage my UI, and I go to the sign-in experience, to the how to say, splash. Now, let's move back to the slide where. I apologize for the delay, but it actually takes some time to bounce back and forth. OK, now we're here. Now, what is the next thing that happens when I hit sign in? List of providers, thank you. And I'm sorry for doing this, but I have to ensure that you are still alive. It's a contractual obligation. So I have to ask, because if I don't hear anything, where's the light? I don't really see you. Don't take advantage by making me. My nephews would do that. So here what happens is that actually we made a specific choice. We decided to show the list of identity providers within the Metro UI experience. This is possible because the access control service not only offers you the test page for the home realm discovery with a list of providers, but it also provides a JSON list with all the URLs that you need to know for actually going and authenticating there. So those URLs contain the identity provider and then a long query string which describes what you want to do with that. I want to sign in. I want you to come back to this specific namespace in access control service. All these kind of things. So basically what happens is that the system reaches out for one of these endpoints, gets back the JSON, and then renders the page that we have seen before with all the various identity providers. So let's go and let's do that with our very slow switch. OK, so we hit sign in. And here we get to the code that I was talking about. Here I have the address of that JSON feed for my namespace. Then I just create a classic XML HTTP request. I could have used the shortcuts in JavaScript in Windows 8. There are very nice shortcuts for doing this. But I wanted to keep these very clear. I'm sure that how many of you ever used the XML HTTP request object? See? That's very common. Like, this is super straightforward. Then I get my list, and then I actually parse it so that I can do data binding. Now, the thing that you see below is a little trick that I'm using for actually showing the mobile version of a UI, at least for Live ID and for Facebook. Because what ACS is using is the default full-blown, full-page list. And instead here, as you have seen, we have a little space. So let me hit F5. OK, perfect. So back to the slides. So now let's see what happens when somebody clicks on Facebook again. At this point, I have the problem that I mentioned before. Facebook wants users to authenticate using a browser, but I'm not using a browser. Well, in Windows 8, since we are aware of the problem, we created one specific tool that you can use for showing the browser in a web surface when you need it. Since we know that this thing will happen very often for authentication or when you want to ask the user permission to do something. So it's not just username and password. It could be things like, yes, access my picture, but not my wall, stuff like that. Then we have this system component called the Web Authentication Broker, which can be called by any language. It's part of WinRT runtime. And it does a lot of interesting things, such as, for example, completely isolating from your application what is going on in there. In the machine that you have seen, no, OK, I'll leave it here for the moment. In the machine that you have seen, I'm actually already signed in Facebook. But the cookie that I have on this machine cannot be used in there because the Web Authentication Broker keeps me isolated from it. Now, there is a mode in which I can actually prove that my service knows about my application, and I can actually avoid that and share cookies. But by default, things remain completely separated. That's very, very handy. So here, basically, what happens is that you get this guy. And let me draw a few lines. This guy actually gets stuff from Facebook. Let's go back to our app. So let's see it on Facebook. So here it's just the event of a selection on the list. And then here we have one method which is very, very, very straightforward. Now, this is how the authentication broker works. Let me run to cursor. The web authentication broker is a call, of course, from the namespace of WinRT. So it's not pure JavaScript, it's a projection on JavaScript. And what do I need to pass is the mode, like if I'm using the single sign-on thing that I said before, or if I'm using the isolated mode. Here, I'm using the isolated mode. And then I needed to pass two parameters. One is the URL from where I want to start. And the URL from where I want to start is the one of the identity provider that I selected. That's how I want to initialize the dialog. The other one is the URI that I want to use for telling the broker to terminate. That if they hit in there, that means that the authentication took place, and so the dialog should close, and it should give back the results. Now, here there is the interesting thing. When that takes place, here we're using what we call promises. How many of you are heard in these days what are JavaScript promises? Almost everybody. Well, it's a new paradigm in which substantially we can do asynchronous operations super, super easy. We have this then thing, which is substantially providing me with a way of saying, if I succeed, call this callback. If I don't succeed, call this other callback. So let me just hit F5. And here we get, let me just authenticate, otherwise it may time out. And while I do that, let me switch back on the slides so that I can tell you what happened here. So let me delete this guy, make this slightly smaller. So what happened here is that, exactly like before, I got a token from Facebook, I sent it to the access control service, the access control service sent it back transformed somehow. And here there's the interesting thing. As of today, the token comes back from ACS. Actually, the token is an SWT token, which is a very easy format, much, much easier than the SAML token. Now, the token gets returned in the body, whereas the web authentication broker today expects the token in the query string. So for making this work, I had to do a little trick. I created one service which I call bouncer, in which basically I send this token using the classic WS federation system, and this service does nothing but putting it in the query string and sending it back. And at this point, this is the callback URL in my dialog, and then at this point I can just get this token, save it in the vault, and move to the next step, which is the one in which I can perform my calls. So that's how it works. So let's actually go through the code so that we can bring it to completion. You may have noticed that so far, and actually you won't see any of any cryptographic code in here. Like this is a pure, simple JavaScript. There is no cryptography, no signatures, and similar. So here I get my response back. The data contains basically the token. Again, I create my password vault. I add my credential to it. And then I just go ahead and I show my part. And here, when I hit invoke, I should get to my default JS. And apparently not. Of course, because, hey, it's the end of a demo, so something has to happen, right? Here it is. So here I'm doing something super trivial. I'm getting the token. I'm putting it in the authorization header. I'm just putting auth in front of it. And that's it. I make my call, and it worked. So let me super quickly close on this. Your cloud application needs identity. We have seen that. It's worth to protect. It lives outside of your infrastructure. you need to sell it to others. It can be complicated. Some of this complication is self-inflicted. It's our own fault. But very often it is instead a mismatch between using the wrong tool for the job. And anyway, there is some residual complexity because of the users. We have seen how the access control service can get rid of all that complexity and give to you a unified vision in which you don't have to worry about crypto, you don't have to worry about dealing with multiple entities because we take care of that. But in the end, the trick is to remember that if you care about your user and you empower them, you can never go wrong. Thank you.